Hello and welcome back to Photoshop CS6 for web designers. In this video, we're going to talk about creating and using patterns in Photoshop CS6. Now, we're not going to have any patterns in our design for this course. However, it's important to understand how to create patterns because as a web designer, you'll find yourself doing it quite a bit. So first of all, what is a pattern? Well, obviously a pattern is a repeating graphic, but in Photoshop specifically, a pattern is a very small design. Well, it doesn't have to be small, but it's usually a very small design that repeats itself over and over again that you can apply as a fill or as a layer style on a particular layer. So let's talk about how we can use a pattern before we actually talk about how we can create them. So I'm going to create a rectangle using the rectangle tool, and I'm just going to draw it on the stage like so. And we're going to talk about a couple of different ways that we can apply a fill. So with this particular layer selected over here in the layers panel, we can use something called layer styles to apply a pattern to a layer. And there are a couple of ways we can get to the layer styles dialog box. The easiest way is we can go to the layer menu, and then in this second little section here we have layer style, and we can choose which layer style we want to apply. So this has bevel and emboss, strokes, shadows, drop shadows, inner shadows, things like that. But we also have a pattern overlay. So if we click on pattern overlay, that pulls up the options for that, and we can see that automatically applied to our shape. Well, in the layer styles dialog drop down, we can actually choose from a number of different patterns here. Now in this particular computer, we have a couple of patterns that have been made in the past. And the first few here, though, are patterns that ship with Photoshop. But as you can see by clicking around on some of these custom patterns, you can create patterns out of pretty much anything that repeats. So let's talk about another way we can apply a pattern to a layer. I'm going to hit cancel. I'm going to get rid of our rectangle layer. And let's say that we just want to fill an entire layer with a pattern. So let's say we have our background layer here and we want to fill it with a pattern. Well, we can do that by going to the edit menu. Make sure your background layer is selected. We'll go to the edit menu, click on fill, and then one of the drop down options under use is pattern. So you can choose foreground color or background color. You can select your own color, or we can click on pattern. If we click on pattern, we have the same drop down with the same options in it. So we can choose one of these options, click on OK, and then it will fill your entire layer with that pattern. So now that we know how to use patterns, let's talk about how we can create one. Let's create a very simple checkered pattern in Photoshop. So I'm gonna hit Command Z to undo that, and I'm gonna create a new file. I'm gonna do all of this on a new file, and it's gonna be a simple checkered pattern. So I wanna keep this pretty small. Let's say we want it to be 10 pixels wide by 10 pixels tall. So we'll click on OK, and you'll see that we don't have a whole lot of room to work with here, but we can zoom in. And you can zoom in a number of different ways. You could go to the zoom tool over here on the toolbar and then just click until you're zoomed in as much as you want to be. However, you'll never see me doing that. I always use the keyboard shortcut for zooming because it saves a lot of time. And the keyboard shortcut is you hold on to spacebar and command, or spacebar and control if you're using a PC, and then you can click, or you can click and drag. If you click and drag to the right, it will zoom in. If you drag it to the left, it'll zoom out. So I'm going to zoom in as much as it will let me, and then I'm going to draw my pattern. So let's just say we want a black and white checkered pattern, or let's do red and black checkered pattern, an old 50s type checkerboard. So let's start by creating a rectangle, and we'll start in the upper left-hand corner and drag it out to the center of the stage. Now you'll notice it actually started a little above the upper left-hand corner, but that's fine as long as you just bring it down so that it's halfway down and halfway across, like so. Okay, then I'll drag another one out over here. Again, the extra pixels on the outside don't really make a difference. It's just the pixels that are inside the viewing area that we care about. And then we'll do two more squares with black as the fill color. So I'm going to click in a blank area of our layers panel to deselect that, or you could just click on the background layer if your layers panel is already full of layers and you don't have any blank area to click into. You can just click on the background layer there and it won't affect anything whenever you try to change the color. So let's change the fill color now to black, and then draw a couple more squares here and here. So we've created a very tiny pattern. If we hit Command 1 or Control 1 on a PC, it will zoom out to 100%. And then if you go up here to the Move tool, it will get rid of those extra borders that we were seeing around the layer. And there's our pattern. Now, in order to effectively turn this into a pattern, this all needs to be on the same layer. So I want to merge these layers together. And one way we can do that is we can select the top layer, shift click on the bottom layer so that all layers are selected. And then we can go to Layer, Merge Layers, and it will merge them all together. Or you can hit Command E on a Mac or Control E on a PC to merge the layers as well. So now that all of those layers are merged together and that background layer is selected, we can go to the Edit menu and click on Define Pattern. When we click on Define Pattern, we'll get this dialog box where we can enter in a name for the pattern, and we'll just call it Checker, and click on OK. So that saves it in our predefined pattern. So now we can go back to our original file, and we can now fill this layer with that pattern if we want to. So we could go to Edit, Fill, oops, I missed. There we go. And then again, we're going to use a pattern, but the custom pattern we're going to use is the one we just created, which is now visible as the last item in your pattern set. So once we select that, we'll click on OK, and now we can see it fills our entire background with that color. Now for a checkered pattern, I think this might be a little too small because it's a little hard to look at. It almost feels like an optical illusion, like things are trying to jump out at you. But you get the idea. If you need to change it, we can jump back to our file, make it a little bit bigger. We can hit Option Command I or Control Alt I on a PC to pull up your image size dialog, and we can double the size of that very easily and then save that as a pattern. So we'll go to Edit, Define Pattern, and you'll see since we increased the size of it that it actually messed with the pixels a little bit. So we could actually go in and recreate this to make it look better. But for now, I'm just going to go ahead and click on Checker 2 and hit OK. And then we'll go back into our original file and we'll go to Edit, Fill, and this time we'll choose the new pattern we just created, which should be a little bit larger, a little bit easier on the eyes. And there we go. Now, obviously, for most web designs, you're going to use a much more subtle pattern than this. And you need to keep in mind that when you're creating patterns, especially something with just a subtle background, you don't need much contrast. So if you're using white on black for a small pattern, it's really going to hurt the eyes, especially if it's a real intricate pattern. But if you use light gray on medium gray with just a little bit of contrast there, then it's going to be much more effective and much less painful on the eyes. So that wraps it up for using patterns in Photoshop. In the next video, we'll actually create our first bit of graphics for our web design, and we'll do that using textures. And textures are a very powerful way to add some interest to your site without taking it too far. So we'll get to that in the next video. Thank you for watching.